Now we're going to be doing a new series. We just did I've been doing 12s of late, and so this is another 12-part series. And it's going to be principles and values to live by. And this is really derived from these 40 principles that I had in Conform to His Image. And then what we did is we decided to organize those 40 principles, because they were just a litany of things in no particular order. But now they've been ordered. And we have, as you're going to see the structure, pursue God. And they're going to be 12 for pursue God. It's going to be 12 for pursuing godly character, and there's going to be 12 for pursuing the highest good of others. So God, yourself, and others, you see. So the whole idea then is whatever begins with the love of God ends with the love of neighbor, but there are 12 of each. So what are we going to do then? Well, what we're going to do is 3 each time. So that works out to 4 per each one. So we're going to have 4 sessions. So that we're going to be, then that means today we're going to be looking at the first 3. Does that make sense? Simple logic. And it happens that they are a nice triplet because they work well together. Faith, hope, and love. So you can't do better than that. So let's take a look at 1 Thessalonians 1:3, first of all, because here Paul, in giving thanksgiving for his readers, we give thanks to God always for all of you, making mention of you in our prayers, constantly bearing in mind your work of faith, there's your faith, and labor of love and steadfastness of hope. So the 3 are put there together, you see. So they are a wonderful triplet because they give us a sense of what does it mean to grow in faith. And the text that we are referring to here, being fully persuaded that what God's promised He will perform, is Romans 4:21. So when we go to Romans and we see this text that concerns Abraham, or what we would say about Abraham, 21, I said, right? Yes. So he was given this promise. And let me just go back to give you the context. It's by faith. So the whole idea, of course, is his emphasis in Romans, that it has to be by faith, not a matter of just our endeavor, our work, or performance. That's what religion is, as we know. And I have to say, the only quote religion, and it's really not a religion in my view, the only worldview that really eliminates that idea. Every other thing I've seen is a variation of works, some work system of pleasing, trying to achieve or perform or placate whatever they view the ultimate reality to be. It's always that, whether in the East or in the West. It's the human disposition. We always go back to law-based living because checklist living is our natural modality. We want to count, compare, compete, quantify, and see who's doing what and how we're sizing up. Faith you can't but faith and grace you can't quantify. It's another thing entirely. But here he's been saying that the whole thing is righteousness is made by faith. If you see, so he's saying then the law brings about wrath, but where there's no law, there's no violation. But it is by faith, he says, that it may be in accordance with grace. So by grace through faith becomes this motif that you see throughout the epistles. And I'm up to Hebrews 13 now in my report from my audio. So I've decided every few months then to hear a different translation. I'm going to do the ESB next time. So just keep I'm going to give you a report. I'm only doing that to manipulate you and to motivate you and to prod you and to probe you and maybe even perhaps through a sense of guilt or you see guilt because you see guilt and these are my friends, you see. Guilt and shame, they work well together. It's a wonderful East-West combination, you see. It works well together. But that the promise will be guaranteed because not only of the law, but also the faith of Abraham. So this faith precedes the law, of course, and the whole idea, a father of many nations in the presence of him whom he believed, even God who gives life to the dead and calls into being that which did not exist. I love that text. Gives life to the dead and calls into being something that didn't even exist, out of nothing, ex nihilo. And that's the biblical, again, another unique creation account, by the way. You find no other ex nihilo. It's always some primordial thing that's around that the gods have to manipulate. But God makes ex nihilo, calls into being that which didn't exist. Matter, energy, space, time, ex nihilo. And so this is the one who calls into being, and in hope against hope, he believes that he might become a father of many nations, according to that which had been spoken, so your descendants will be, in spite of the fact that his body was just getting older. Remember, he tried it out to try to help out God when he was old. And Ishmael didn't work out really well. It was not a good move. That's an example of the child of the flesh, as opposed to the child of the spirit, which is Isaac. Very different thing. How's that working out for you with Ishmael? And it's led to a bit of a conflict since then. The Ishmaelites and the sons of Isaac. You can get that idea. The whole conflict. But he said he's good as dead. He's about 100 years old. See, finally then, when he's totally beyond his tether and finally would admit even himself, it would be stupid for me to try to help God out here. That's when God shows up, when he is completely incapable, and himself would realize that. And that's what happens then. And the deadness of Sarah's womb, because she's 90, and her womb was dead. Yet with respect to the promise of God, he did not waver in unbelief. I don't understand how this could be. Because I doubt that she didn't go through menopause, but I'll let you process that when she's 90 years old. But it is a miraculous thing, of course, is the point. You couldn't do this. But grew strong in faith, giving glory to God, and here's the key phrase, being fully assured that what God had promised, he was also able to perform, therefore also was credited to him as righteousness. And so you can see this idea of faith, which, as you know in Hebrews 11:1, is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And you will recall as well that I had this little diagram which I showed you here, where I took the vertical axis going for the hope for, and as on the horizontal, the x-axis, and the y is going from the visible to the invisible, and that the track we need to take then is actually 4 quadrants, and we need to get to quadrant 3. I fear most people, even believers, never reach escape velocity, because there are 3 things that pull them down. And I'll go to there. These worries of the world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word and make it unfruitful. And so this is why we're supposed to go even beyond the first naivety of childishness to childlike hope and awe and wonder. But very few people make that, to see the world in a new way, seeing it from the standpoint of infinity and eternity, the one who made all things, because everything, if you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, will point beyond itself to the one who made all things. So it indeed is a perspective that we are called to cultivate. So to grow in faith, how do you grow your faith? Well, in part, through exercise. And so your faith will grow when you commit yourself to things that will fail unless God shows up. I want you to hear that again. That your faith will grow when you commit yourself to enterprises that will fail unless God shows up. I'll give you one such example: evangelism. It'll fail unless God shows up, you see. And there are a whole array of things of actually being in a context of seeing another person change, but not through my manipulations and plots and ploys, but rather because of the indwelling power of the Spirit of God that somehow transforms us into the agents of grace that God uses in a way that could not happen unless it was a divine empowering. So that's how we grow in faith. And that, as to hope, the whole idea is anchored in the promises of God. And so this hope that we have, and you see the text I'm using is Hebrews 6:18-19, is particularly valuable because it's described in this way as being an anchor of the soul, a hope that's both sure and steadfast. So there are 2 impossible things that God cannot be violated. 2 impossible things. And it's the character of God and his promises. And his promises flow out of his unchanging character, and therefore they can be trusted. The reason why many people drop out of the race is because they become embittered, because they put their hope in things that God never promised. And then suppose God let them down. But rather, what you must when you trust the promises of God, there's a power. There's an unchangeableness of his purpose. Two unchangeable things, then. It's impossible for God to lie. We who have taken refuge, I love the imagery there, have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us, this hope we have, an anchor of the soul. I remember that hymn, My Anchor Holds. Remember that? Some of you will know it. Yeah, my anchor holds. And that's picked up from this idea, because you are now, in spite of the circumstances of life and the currents and the storms, you're connected to something where you won't drift, because you're connected to the one thing that's unchangeable. And therefore, Christ has gone beyond us. He's gone there before us. He's our high priest. So it's a beautiful picture then of what we're intended to be. So our hope must rest there, as I say, in the person and work of Jesus Christ and his promise of eternal life. And it's a sure and steadfast hope, as we say. So this is a beautiful picture of what God's called for us there. And then the third one is love. And I'm just giving highlights because I'm teaching 3 of these units. That's why it would have been impossible to do more than that. But I didn't want to make it a 36-part series. So you got to kind of balance it out. So this is the kind of a balance I've got. Three at a time, we can manage that. So faith, hope, and love. We're to love the Lord our God with all our being. So we know that our mind is involved. You love him with your mind, with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And if you put them in that sequence, you have the inside out. You see, your strength is your work, your actions, your choices. So it goes from being to knowing to doing. So, but you need to love him well. And I think I'm just looking at this Veritas Forum video with Francis Collins, who is emphasizing the need to love the Lord your God with all your mind. And it's one of the things he says, you don't put your brain in the shelf, then you want to use your mind. And if anything, it'll lead to a greater intellectual clarity and coherence, because you're thinking God's thoughts after him. Doesn't it make sense that the more, all things being equal, the more you read the scriptures, the better you'll be able to think? Because you're following the thoughts of the one who made the blueprint for life. And so that's an amazing thought. With the more you really submit your mind to the truths and authority of Scripture and meditate and chew on the text of Scripture, it's going to, all things being equal, clarify your mind and give you a greater capacity. Because I don't think we should have this notion that that we have to diminish in this area. Our physical bodies will diminish, but I don't think our minds, apart from organic diminishments, need to diminish. I think that there's a different kind of intelligence that we develop, though, that's a different nature, but it's a more of a sagacity, a wisdom that gets to see the whole of things and puts them together in a more holistic manner. But that said, you're to love him from the inside out, and this is the point. Love him from the inside out with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And that is the concept of doing this in this knowledge. So as we do this great commandment, we spend time. How do you come to know somebody? How do you come to love them? By time spent in intimacy is enhanced by communication and by a willingness to know one another, for the time spent to listening to one another. And part of it is, in fact, communication. The key there is listen and training ourselves to be better listeners. And so there are many times that I'm just speaking when I should be quiet. We've been given one mouth and 2 ears. We ought to use them proportionately. And it's rare that I actually regret not saying things. It's more often that I regret having said things. Then the toothpaste is out of the tube and you can't squeeze it back in again, you see. So there's some things, I'm so glad I didn't say that thing, because that would not have worked well. So this whole idea of using and loving God, and to love him is to allow him as well to infuse his love in you and through you as you, so that you become more of his agent in this world. There's a connection. So that you grow in communion and communication, and part of the relationship is enhanced as well by proper responses to knowing what the one you love wants and doing that, you see. So there's also that side of things where you become lovable because you are other-centered. And remember, if you encounter a person who's characterized by the following qualities: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. That's the person you want to be around, isn't it? Just think about that. Now, the interesting thing is love, joy, peace, and so forth is mediated uniquely through the personality of the person who displays it. In other words, it's not just something that we're automata, but rather his love and power and spirit are actually fused and manifested in you and through you in a way that no one else can do. It's an interesting thought. And you become an agent of grace. And so you become a living epistle. You become one who is evident that you have been with Jesus. Remember, they mark them as having been with Jesus. This is an important concept. So your love for God grows in that respect. And remember the questions then. What do you seek? In other words, really effectively, what do you love the most? And at the last question, do you love me more than these? So who am I to you? That's the middle question. Because as you grow in your understanding of who he is to you, then you grow in your capacity to respond and receive and relate. So it's not a static, but a growing thing. In my view, by the way, in heaven, it's not going to be static. I think it's going to be further up and further in. You're not going to just be sitting around in a cloud and we've arrived. But rather, are there any magazines here? As the guy asked, remember that? Yeah. But rather, it's going to be a further up, further in thing. It's a story, as Lewis puts it. And as for that, their story ended and they are happily ever after. But then there was the real story. It turns out all their life in Narnia was only the cover and the title page of a book, The Great Story, which no one has yet read, gets better than every chapter gets better than the one before. So you can't yet imagine. I had a dream, I think, about these ideas that the 3 pointers are beauty, intimacy, adventure. Those are pointers, aren't they? Beyond to the next world. They're not, and I must have been dreaming about it because I woke up with this statement. Don't idolize the pointers. In other words, the greatest moments are hints of home, but they're not the thing itself. You don't have the capacity to imagine what God has prepared for you. But if you could only cultivate that growing, and this relates to this, love for him, then your desire will be to be with him in that consummate union. And so, if anything, you become more homesick and world-weary, and which is a healthy thing. But you become more of an effective agent in this world as you move in that direction. So a person whose heart is set on pilgrimage. You see, you're a pilgrim. You're set on pilgrimage. You know where you're going. Pilgrim doesn't just meander. He's headed toward a destination. And we haven't arrived there yet. But it's going to be better, and it'll be more. The best things on this earth do not compare with the least of heaven. So then why would we cling to this planet and love our loved ones more than our love for Jesus? See, it's a good thing for us to realize that's our real call. So faith, hope, and love. Now, the interesting thing about them is that 2 of them are temporary. You see, faith is temporary. Why? Because when you see him face to face, you will no longer have to walk by faith. You see, it'll be by sight. And so this whole idea of faith, what we've put our faith in, it's an anchor for the soul and our hope and so forth. But the idea is when you see him, just like when you're going to see the living word. So think about what Bible study is like. When you're studying the one who is the living one, the living Bible, it's a strange thought. But then hope, it speaks of this in this whole idea of hope. If we have what we're hoping for, this is the Romans 8:24-25. Let me pull that up for you so you can see it. So here, Paul is speaking about this in my favorite chapter in Romans, and he says, in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. You see, once you get it, you don't have to hope for it. So two things then are temporary, faith and hope. But love will endure. See, when everything else is gone, that is what's going to endure, because God is love, and he is spirit, and the triunity of the Spirit of God. God is a tripersonal spirit. We can't even begin to imagine what we're talking about when we use that. When he spoke those mysterious words to the woman at the well, God is spirit. Just think of those three words. Incredible. You can't understand that. But spirit apparently brought energy into being. And no one can define energy. And it brought time into being, and no one can define time. Try it out, and you'll see you can't. You have an intuition, but it's gone beyond your mind. So here, all things, as we know, this is slowed down, compressed energy. But no one knows exactly what energy is. And yet, what made energy higher yet? Spirit. God is spirit. We can't understand these matters, but you are a spirit being. You're a spiritual being having this earthbound embodied pilgrimage. Now, unlike the angels, you are meant to be embodied. Now, if you go to be with Jesus before he comes for his own, you will be disembodied. You won't have an intermediate body. Some people speculated that's not the case. You'll be in his presence. And it's not good. It's not soul sleep either. I do think our experience of time will be radically different anyway. But the point is, you will be in his presence, to be absent from the body, present with the Lord. But at the same time, though, you are meant to be an embodied being. And so this whole idea, we wait for the first fruits of the Spirit. We groan within ourselves. There's this longing that we should get in touch with. You should be groaning for glory. It's an interesting phrase. Groaning for glory. Because you see, you're waiting for your adoption. What is it? Your redemption of your body. And when I think about that concept and consider Paul's great chapter on this whole idea of the resurrection, it's sown a perishable body, it's raised an imperishable. Sown in dishonor, raised in glory. Sown in weakness, raised in power. Sown a natural body, raised a spiritual body. So this concept here is so radically different. We can't even begin to imagine. But he does tell us this thing that has never been seen before. I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep. That's some new thing. As it has been said, the statistics are impressive. 1 out of 1 dies. There's only been 2 exceptions. But that's thought then, is that here he's saying we're not all going to sleep. We're not going to die, all of us. But we will all be changed in the moment in the twinkling of an eye. But he's trying to use an image of the shortest increment. Since they didn't have watches, they surely didn't have a stopwatch. What's the shortest increment of time you could imagine in the ancient world? A twinkling of the eye. You see? A fraction of a second. And that idea then is that you won't even know it, but suddenly you're transformed from one to the other, from this perishable to the imperishable. So the perishable must put on, this is what we apparently are longing for. We're waiting for our fulfillment, our completion, our adoption, and that the fullness of our adoption as sons, where it will be declared and made manifest to all, including the angelic hosts, that this is God is who he claims to be. So that his transformation of those who were formerly alienated from him now become people who are his beloved children. It is a demonstration, a greater demonstration, that if he had made a world where people had no real option but to obey him, which would not be a very satisfying relationship at the end of the day. I mean, my daughter had this thing where she had a string. I remember this dopey-looking doll. I forget what it was called. It was one that was very popular. You pull the thing, "I love you, Mommy," and she pull it again, "I love you, Mommy." How long did that please her? That didn't last very long at all, you see. She stopped pulling that cord. Because it was not a very authentic thing, you see. They should have made it where it occasionally, "I love it," when you didn't touch it. But that would have been a little bit more effective. It would give you the illusion of intelligence or consciousness. But the point is that God's not interested in a relationship with a programmed machine, a robot, an automaton. And that's the risk of love. And as C.S. Lewis put it, the only place where you can be totally safe from all the dangers and perturbations of love is hell. Then you'll be safe. Interesting thought, isn't it? You see, the danger of love is that there's a price to be paid for the beloved, and there's a romance involved, and we get to participate. We get to be players in God's great story. So we're part of a great drama, and death will be swallowed up in victory. And so the sting of death is sin, the power, but thanks be to God who gives us the victory. Be steadfast. This is why he concludes this wonderful chapter on the resurrection by saying, you realize now that your work will not perish. It may in this world, but ultimately all that you have done in the name of the Lord will endure. See, God will honor that. And so your work will endure. Because whatever is done as unto the Lord in his power, as you trust the Father, abide in the Son, walk by the Spirit, that's going to endure. And I think we have this deep longing and profound aspiration to see that. So faith, hope, and love. Love will continue. The story will only get richer and better. I do think then that there's no question that part of the reward, when you think about the various aspects of reward, and one of those has to do with your ability to display the glory of God, and responsible service is another. But a third one's relationships, the degree of your capacity for relationships as we're going to be related. Because who is our reward? Is it not you? You are our joy and our crown. So the people in whom he built relationships. But then the fourth one is your intimacy with God, your capacity for the beatific vision. And I do believe then that some people have a greater capacity than others. But even there, somehow, I don't know how, it's going to continue to grow and will continue to go further up and further in. And I don't know how that looks. Most people's idea of being in some kind of a heavenly thing, that they're in this stadium and they're way off in the distance, but they're there. Don't use that imagery, or don't use this idea of my mansion's big, this little tiny mansion, but I have a shack over here. Don't use that, because it's diminishing. You're trying to tie that into an earthbound image, and it stultifies and diminishes it. But rather, you realize that you haven't yet seen it. So that's why I say don't idolize the pointers. The best goods you've ever known are only pointers to a greater good that you cannot yet name. You don't have the capacity. But I promise you, it'll be more than worth the effort, you see. Because, as I say, the best is yet to come. The least of heaven is better than the greatest of earth. You're not going, and again, as I say, you're not in the land of the living, going to the land of the dying. You're in the land of the dying, and you're going to be headed to the land of the living. I just wanted to call your attention to a couple things before we go. On the reflections.org website, you can see on the home page there this Think on These Things webinar series. So this is a thing that you can just go to that and just sign up for that thing. And we're looking at these questions. Is there really a God? Can anyone be sure that these are major questions, and they're based upon my book, I'm Glad You Asked. But the other thing that's interesting is this, Christianity.com, so that if we go to the home page here, we're posting an article once a week, and so in this case, this thing here, but we've posted, and these are all questions from I'm Glad You Asked. Now, it's a divine coincidence that these two correspond. That was not intentional. But Christianity.com wanted, I'm Glad You Asked. And then Cameron was the one who recommended that we do, why don't you do the 12 questions, and I'm Glad You Asked. It turned out that the two are syncing in that respect. But these are the questions you know you're going to be hitting all the time. And so, reliability of the Bible, salvation through faith too easy, psychological crutch, the typical things. So these are the questions, and if I did it in a kind of a sequence, It would really go from the question about God to miracles, psychological clutch, and it gets more specific as you go, and it gets more specific about more objections, first from religion, then Christianity, and then clarification of the gospel. Good works, too simple, and so forth. So it's these are the basic questions that are being asked, and so this is what we found. All the objections I've ever really encountered are variations and combinations of these. Now, there's many things within them, of course. Just how I created the Bible is huge, but they're combinations of these areas, and we're now putting them out as articles as well. So we're putting them together in that manner. Now, what was your thought about this faith, hope, and love, and putting them together in that way? What implications came up in your mind's eye for that?
I hope you pardon me for doing this occasionally, but I'd like to comment on that. And I want to ask, how do we groom our talent? And how do we help our soul become more righteous? And I think the answer is we need to focus on the three things that we were talking about today: faith, hope, and we have a hard time focusing these days because of the chaos we see around us. I personally have spent a lot of time over the last few years looking at videos on things that are theological and spiritual. And I appreciate what Ken has done to teach us about that. But I still have a difficulty in focusing on the unseen when I look around me and see all the chaos I'm in.
In fact, in our group, we were discussing this very thing, and we've talked about this before. I did a teaching on this here. When was that? Last October, I think it was. And I've done this, I've told you before, with Karen. I did it maybe a few months ago. And it was really interesting to see the video and stop at each point. What does it mean that we will no longer be pulled down by this world system and its values? What does it mean to overcome the flesh? And that means the judgment seat of Christ. And she had a great fear of the judgment seat of Christ. And actually, Paul says, when he spoke of that, he says, therefore, knowing the fear of God, we persuade men. But then the devil, getting rid of that, this would be great alone. But then what does it mean to have a resurrected body in a resurrected world with an unbounded future as you garden, and that everything you wish is going to be what he would want for you? Just think about that. You can't think sin. That alone is an incredible thought. And then your capacities. I think what we need to train ourselves to do is to use our mind's eye and our imagination to cultivate a better understanding, because this is the reason why most believers actually are willing to put their trust in Jesus for their eternal destiny, but then they put their hope in the world for everything else. The reason for that is because the world is palpable and immediate. What God's promising is nebulous and vague. So if I can, by careful exercises, usually use my mind's eye in concert with others to amplify our aspirations, to increase your longing, to long for so much that you finally admit only He can sustain it. And that is really a great vision that I think is very critical. The weight of glory talks about this very thing, where Jesus, where Lewis says, if a trans-temporal, trans-finite good is our real destiny, and it is, you were meant for eternity and infinity. Nothing less will do. Anything else would be a dumb idol that would break your heart. And any other good in which our desire fixes must be in some degree fallacious. You see, we have an inconsolable secret within each of us that needs to be teased out. We cannot tell it because it's a desire for something that's never actually appeared in our experience. Now let's stop and think about that. What he's processing and helping his listeners understand, this requires a kind of a magic, as it were. He says, it was not in them, you see, the books, the music. He says, that's not the thing itself. That's why I said, don't idolize the pointers. It was not in them, it only came through them. What came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they're mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshipers. They're not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. Isn't that beautiful stuff? Do you think I'm trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am, but remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as for inducing them. And you and I have the need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness, which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. Almost, and this is key, right now, more now than ever, but if you can imagine when he did this in 1941, almost our whole education has been directed to silencing this shy, persistent inner voice. Almost all our modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of man is to be found in this earth. You see? That is a lie. And for us to realize that eye has not seen, nor has ear heard, nor has entered into the heart of man all the things that God has prepared for those who love him. So this is his understanding then, that you were meant for far, far more. So that this idea, we remain conscious of a desire which no natural happiness will satisfy. My assignment for you, and I'm giving you an assignment for those who would be willing to take it, get The Weight of Glory. You can just Google it and get a PDF. That's what I did. And read this sermon. And I think you'll find it to be most profound. One last question. I just felt prompted to share that in light of your comments there. This is, every time I read this, it recalibrates me, brings me a little bit closer, you see, a little closer. Yes?
You had a little thing up there a second ago that had think on these things.
Yes.
And I noticed that in John chapter 15, that phrase is used 3 times by Christ. In John 16, it's used 7 times by Christ. So when he uses a phrase 10 times in 2 chapters, it might behove us to pay attention.
So you're looking at John
15 and 16.
15, 16. It's a good phrase. Yeah. It's also the name, by the way, I should mention. This is something we're working on right now. It's a set of 12 booklets. It'll be in a slipcase. It's going to be on living with an eternal perspective, perspectives on prayer, discerning the will of God, scripture memory guide, dealing with grief, 8 spiritual essentials, 1-week prayer guide, spiritual renewal cards, and the 10 marks of a disciple, 4 words of God. So it's going to be little booklets, and they'll be in a slipcase. So that's another think on these things. I like that phrase.